When they got inside, two swords popped out of the ground and cut them in half. According to the story,
What? Alright, what did medieval Muslims think of ancient Egypt? Reaction to me, for me, by me. Been saving these reactions for a while because usually I have a lot to say in these reactions, and it takes a bit too long to
Hi,
make this type of stuff.
My name is Siavish. In 632 CE, the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, passed away. His successors, the Rashidun caliphs, turned their army on the two giants to the north.
Alright, look, 13 seconds in, look, stay with me, okay? I saw this dark-skinned lady, I think she was a dark-skinned Muslim, who explained that the first caliphate was very much colonizing empire, just like your average European empire, okay? And I bring this up because I keep on seeing annoyingly enough a whole bunch of Muslims in my comments, not all of them of course, but I keep seeing a whole bunch of ignorant Muslims in my comments. I'm not saying ignorant in a bad way, I'm saying ignorant they just clearly just lack knowledge. They always type my European empire colonized and blah blah blah, okay? They find it weird that I'm proud of my heritage or whatever, right? And they always say oh, how could you be proud of the fact that your country was brutally colonized, even though my country was even brutally colonized. But even if it was brutally colonized, dude, the Arab caliphates, well, no, I should more say the Muslim caliphates were very much just a colonizing empire too, okay? I mean, I'm even reacting to the rise of Islam. What are the terms that they give each and every city that they besiege? You can either convert to Islam or basically die. I mean, really and truly, there's no other way to put it, okay? And because when you colonize somebody, typically what happens is your culture and whatnot gets, they usually pick up your culture via good ways, bad ways, it doesn't matter, okay? Seriously, guys, let's not play double standards here, okay? Let's not do it, okay? Seriously.
Byzantine and the Sassanid empires. When the dust settled, Muslim Arabs found themselves ruling over lands that had previously been inhabited by civilizations greater than the Arabs. Persia and Mesopotamia had a rich ancient history that the people living there were very aware and proud of.
Yeah, very aware and proud of, because like I said, Persia was far from freaking Islam before they essentially got conquered and colonized. Now Persia is more Islamic today, right? I mean, come on now, people. And it's funny because I don't really see any Muslims pointing that out at all. The ones who like to complain about my European colonization, bro, get out of here with that hypocrisy.
Syria and Egypt had been under Roman rule for around 6 centuries. They were very Greek-Byzantine in their nature by now. However, within Egypt, there were great ancient monuments, temples, tombs, and statues left behind by a clearly great civilization that was no more. A civilization that had been trampled by outside forces, of which the Muslim Arabs were but one. The only background that these Muslim Arabs had for them were the stories of Joseph or Yusuf and Moses or Musa as recited in the Quran. So naturally, they were curious about who the people who built these towering structures were and why did they build them. So the question arises, how did these Muslim Arabs make sense of these ancient monuments and the people who built them? How did medieval Muslims see ancient Egypt?
Now this is going to be very interesting because medieval Muslims, they were quite smart and intelligent, and this is going to be during the Arab Golden Age, I think.
This video is brought to you by, well, you guys, thanks to my
but we're gonna skip this part, but I'm very looking forward to see this because medieval Muslims, this is the peak of their knowledge, okay? So much so that freaking Europeans went to them for a lot of knowledgeable stuff. So I'm really curious to hear how they're going to talk about this.
The first place for medieval Muslims to answer questions about ancient Egypt would be to look at written records that the ancient Egyptians had left behind. Fortunately, there are a lot of them on tablets, steles, and walls. However, unfortunately, medieval Muslims had no idea how to read them. For 600 years, the land of Lower Egypt, or what we now know as the country of Egypt, was ruled by first the Roman Empire and then the Byzantine Empire. By the time Islamic rule came around in the 640s, the majority of the people who lived there were Coptic-speaking Christians who had long forgotten how to read the hieroglyphs, one of the scripts of their ancient ancestors. They had been
Well, I would say the Roman Empire and then the Muslim Empire, because the Byzantine Empire is also just the Roman Empire.
Influenced by the Greek language of the Byzantine Empire, which had become the lingua franca in much of the Western Middle East. As a result, there was no way to learn about ancient Egypt from what we would now call primary sources. The only sources that the Muslims could learn from were outside sources. There, the first sources were obviously the Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet. The Quran does mention Egypt some 30 times and talks about the stories of Yusuf and Musa. They're largely the same as they're told in the Bible. The Prophet also talked about Egypt, but not much about its history. He did talk about how the Copts were good people and instructed the Muslims to treat them well. So after the Quran, Muslims reached to the scripture of the people of the book, that is, other Abrahamic faiths, the Christians and the Jews. Where the Quran mentions Egypt some 30 times, the Bible mentions it some 600 times. So,
bro, the amount of times growing up as a kid, hearing the Bible being taught, I always used to think that Egypt was like the main like central, what's the word, like central world in the Bible. Like, I swore I heard like nothing else, because the Bible just talks about Egypt so freaking much, dude. Which is funny, because the main characters of the Bible, technically speaking, in a sense, well, depending on where you're reading, of course, but it's supposed to be Israel and the Israelites, the 12 tribes of Judah. Oh my goodness, man. But the amount of times I heard Egypt in the Bible is crazy, man.
There's a lot more detail in the Bible. Muslims used these details for creating a canon of stories of the prophets, known as Tarikh al-Anbiya, the stories or history of the prophet.
It's very interesting to me how Islam claims to be the cleansed and pure and more righteous and uncorrupted version of the Abrahamic religions, but here we are with Islam needing to use the Bible. That's kind of an oxymoron when you think about it. Like, that's a really big oxymoron.
Included in this canon were more details about Egypt. Let me take a bit of a detour here and talk about Islamic tendency for appropriating past religious figures. According to the generally agreed upon Islamic tradition, there were 124,000 prophets from Allah who were sent to guide humanity to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, or the righteous path. Adam being the first, Prophet Muhammad the last. However, the Quran only talks about 5 of these by.
What is your definition of a prophet? This is a question to my Islamic viewers. What is your definition of a prophet? Because me and my brother, yes, the same brother that I talked about, who is going to be on this channel eventually in like a month or so, because I made a thing saying, hey, if you have any questions about Christianity, go and ask it, and I will get my brother. I will discuss it, we'll talk about it, I will review those questions and talk about it in a video. So I haven't forgotten about that. But yeah, me and my brother, we were reading some comments and we were like, thinking about what we were gonna say, yada yada yada, and we were like thrown off when we heard Prophet Adam. We were like, Prophet Adam, like, why would Adam be a prophet? So this is my question to my Muslim viewers. Like, what is your definition of a prophet? All right, because I was like, all right, I told him, I was like, let me just go ask him when I react to this type of stuff again. I'm able to bring it up again. So that's my question. Okay.
Name. Yeah, that's 2525. That's around 0.02% of the prophets. So naturally, people wondered who all these other prophets were. Plus, there was a separate question about why all the prophets mentioned in the Quran appeared in the Middle East. At some point, Muslim scholars put the two questions together and arrived at the conclusion that maybe prophets were spread all around the world, and maybe any religious figure from before Islam could be a prophet. This opened the door for Islam to connect itself to almost all ancient religions. Among the people who have been called possible candidates for prophethood are Gautam Buddha, Zoroaster or Zartusht, Ram, who is often considered to be connected to Abraham or Ibrahim, and perhaps most surprisingly, the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, mostly because of his experiment with monotheism, where he implemented the worship of only one god in Egypt. Although technically it was henotheism, because while he worshipped only one god, he did acknowledge the existence of other gods.
So I do believe that other religions kind of are connected to Abrahamic religions, but we just don't have enough information, quite frankly speaking. One, because near-death experiences, people always have reports of near-death experiences, and when they have near-death experiences, it's always usually like something relating to their religion. When they claim to die, they always say, oh, I went to insert whatever the hell I believe in and I came back to life. Number two, so quick fun fact, a lot of people don't know, when the Europeans went to West Africa and bought the slaves from other West African kingdoms, who captured them and who sold them off to the Europeans, emphasizing that part for some of my Islamic viewers to hear, because I'm kind of tired of people hearing, like, typing in my comments, colonization. Okay, when the Europeans went to West Africa and bought the slaves, okay, when they brought them over to the Caribbean, the slave masters converted them to Christianity. And you'd think that it'd be forceful, but it actually was not forceful. The West Africans, the reason why it was actually quite easy to convert the slaves in the Caribbean at this point into Christianity was because the West Africans, who had their own previous religion, by the way, keep that in mind, they realized that Christianity was actually quite similar to their religion that they were doing already before they were captured by others Africans and sold off into slavery to the Europeans. So they had no trouble converting to Christianity. And, you know, before I even learned about that, I always did have a theory that, like, all religions are kind of probably maybe somewhat connected in a way, and that kind of reinforced my theory. Because, guys, West Africa is like, Africa is huge, way, like, massive continent, way bigger than Europe combined, okay? And West Africa is so far away from Europe, okay? So far away from Europe, guys. And it's very far away from Ethiopia and the Middle East, where Christianity started, okay? So, you know, really and truly, I don't think that's a coincidence. I do not think that's a coincidence at all. Like, no. There's no way how that could be a coincidence, okay? So, yeah, just a very interesting thing to point out. Anyways, let's continue.
But what about the followers of these past figures? Buddhism and Hinduism aren't exactly aligned with Islam. How is that explained? Well, it's simple. The original faith was aligned with Islamic and Abrahamic values, but later on, the religions were, quote, corrupted by the followers. That is how Islam talks about Christianity and Judaism as well. So through these tools,
I never understood Hinduism. I don't even think Hinduism No, Buddhism. Some religions don't even have a god, but it's still considered a religion, which is weird. But I think Buddhism doesn't even have a god. It's like your inner light or whatever the heck it is. I don't even know, man. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but no, Hinduism has a god too, I think. I don't know, man. I tried to understand Hinduism and Buddhism. I was never able to understand it. If you want to explain that better to me in the comments, you can.
Became quite easy for Muslims to connect themselves to any ancient religion, including the ancient Egyptian one. Okay, back to the Bible and details about ancient Egypt. So Muslims studied the Bible and started to fill in gaps in history that were not addressed in the Quran. However, the greater Middle East had a lot of religious traditions, and Muslims were exposed to all of them and started to really take in the knowledge, traditions, and even sentiments of these older traditions. Muslims certainly understood that in matters of history, other people were more knowledgeable than they were. For Egypt, that was the Copts. Muslims respected that they knew more about ancient Egypt than they did, and so they often learned from them. Muslim travelers often stayed in Coptic monasteries to enjoy the solitude and hospitality of the monks. Included in those travelers was Ahmad ibn Tulun, the Abbasid governor of Egypt, who became its first independent ruler since Cleopatra. He even invited a Copt scholar to answer questions about ancient Egypt. Another non-Islamic source that the Muslims learned a lot from was the Greeks. They had ruled Egypt for quite some time and had recorded quite a bit of its history. All these non-Islamic sources began to come together in the minds of Muslim scholars who took upon themselves the task of compiling universal histories, that is, history from Adam to their own time.
Okay.
Muslims divided the history of the universe into two portions: before the Great Flood and after the Great Flood.
Yo, let's talk about this real quick. You know, I don't know this is about Islam, but I'm a Christian reacting to this, and so I'm saying this from a Christian perspective. The Great Flood is interesting to me because the Bible talks in like parables, and the Bible kind of like exaggerates some stuff, in my opinion. Because of this, a lot of people tend to misunderstand the Bible a lot, and people take it too literally. I was trying to like think about the Great Flood. I do believe it happened, but I was thinking to myself, was it really the world, or was it like just the world in the Bible, the Bible world, right? Because there is evidence that a flood did happen in like the Middle East, and that was what inspired the story of the Great Flood. Same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah. I was looking this up as well. There is evidence that there was a city, I think near somewhere in Jordan or something like that, in that region. There were two cities that was destroyed by a asteroid that became a meteor and impacted. Hence, you get the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I also heard that they may have discovered Noah's Ark. I don't know how true that is. But the Great Flood is just one of those interesting stories to me because it's like, where could it have happened? And now that I think about it, it's like, I feel like because the story was there was no rain for like 100 years, and then boom, it flooded. So I feel like if you take that into consideration, because I'm pretty sure scientists, they're able to find like weather patterns throughout the past. So I think if they take that into consideration, they'll be able to figure out like where exactly did the Great Flood happen. Because I don't think it was the whole world. I just think that it was like a specific region, if that makes sense, right? Because remember, the Bible does talk in parables, and it kind of exaggerates some stuff. And people take that too literally.
At least,
which is a problem that I see a lot of people do. And then they think that when they think that they debunk stuff from the Bible, I'm like, no, you didn't debunk it. You took it you interpreted it the wrong way, which is why it's important for you to go and read this stuff on your own or learn about it on your own, because you can't really learn about it from other people because they'll have different interpretations of it. Okay, let's continue.
Three writers, Al-Masudi, Al-Suyuti, and Al-Maqrizi, presented some account of Egypt before the Great Flood. That's where the pyramids come in as well. Most medieval Islamic sources tell us roughly the same story, so I'll just present a composite of them all. So before the Great Flood, there was a great figure who was or wasn't a prophet, depending on who you asked. According to Al-Maqrizi, he was named Surid ibn Salhuk. However, according to Al-Suyuti, it was either Surid or someone named Hermes Trismegistus. That's a very Greek-sounding name because, well, it is Greek. He is something of a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, and can be found in Greek and Roman documents. Muslims connected him to the biblical figure Enoch, whom they called Idris, who was a prophet. He starts appearing.
I know you. Not Idris, bro. Not that name. Oh my goodness, dude. I know you. If you know that reference, good for you. But I'm gonna explain though. So there's this like trending clip of a movie in Afghanistan. I think it was like an American made movie where it was talking about like life under the Taliban, and the main character, right, one of the main villains, his name was Idris. Oh my goodness, dude. Look, just okay, go search up Idris I know you, and then put scene in YouTube search and you'll see what I'm talking about. Oh my goodness, dude. Like I'm so sorry, guys. I made so much inside jokes about this. It's just funny to me. Okay, let's continue.
In Islamic sources around the 10th century, when he was seen as a great sage of the days gone. According to Sayyid al-Andalusi, he was the first to study the stars and medicine, and as you'd expect with Arabic speakers, the first to compose poetry. Whether the figure is named Hermes Trismegistus or Surid or Idris, the story is mostly the same across the various sources. Okay. He knew of a great impending disaster. Either God told him or he had a dream, and so he wanted to preserve the knowledge of humanity. He built the pyramids and buried kings in them, along with statues and books. He also inscribed on the walls his knowledge of the stars, the planets, medicine, geometry, alchemy, and spellcasting. This idea that the
spellcasting? What in the world? What is this, Clash of Clans?
Pyramids house ancient knowledge is a major theme through medieval Islamic sources. So much so, the famous alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan himself was quite interested in deciphering the hieroglyphs because he believed that they contained secret knowledge of alchemy. More on that later. Interestingly, the Copts seem to have known that there were people buried in the pyramids. However, according to one who told Ibn Tulun, the foundations of the pyramids were built first, then the sarcophagi were placed in the middle, and then the rest of the pyramids were built on top. That seems to almost sound like a triangular grave rather than a building with passageways and stuff. Anyhow, medieval Muslims did believe that people were buried in them, but the candidates range from Hermes Trismegistus to Aristotle. I should include that some Aristotle denied that Surid or Hermes was the one who built the pyramids. Al-Maqrizi himself quotes Ibn Abd al-Hakam to say that the pyramids were built by someone named Shaddad ibn Ad. Some Muslims might recognize that name. Shaddad ibn Ad is said to have been the ruler of the Iram of the Pillars. Some Uncharted fans might recognize that name. The Ad were an Arab people who are mentioned in the Quran as having been destroyed by Allah. By claiming that it was a member of the Ad and hence Arabs who built the pyramids, the Arabs were claiming a glorious part of the Egyptian civilization, although the Copts denied this even then. Basically, some of these Arabs were doing the thing that Hindu nationalists do when they tell you ancient India had fighter jets and nukes. Al-Masudi gives a very interesting history.
I've never heard of that. Which is funny because I always have like nationalists in my comments who are always I bet you now there's at least one comment from a nationalist. And I usually get clowned on by my other audience. But me personally, I low-key like reading it because I'm like, that seems interesting. But I usually take it with a grain of salt, though. This is the thing about me. I'm usually open to hearing people out. So usually I'm able to like read a whole bunch of things. I'm like, I'll take that into consideration because believe me, I do think a lot. I do. This is why I always encourage people to like comment, you know, tell me stuff that I might not know. Because when I'm thinking by myself, I'm thinking about certain things, or I'm trying to make sense of something, I usually like to hear what other people say to try and make sense of something, right? If that makes sense. And usually, or I discuss my comments with other people, like my brother, who I said earlier, we were reading some of my Muslim comments, and we were talking about it. So no, I'm not just saying that like straight out of my ass, quite frankly speaking. Oh, go comment. No, I'm not saying that straight out of my ass. Like, no, I actually do something with the comments. In fact, if you notice, I heart literally every single comment to signify to you that I read it. Okay, if I haven't heart your comment, that means I haven't seen it and I haven't read it. So yeah.
Of Egypt post-flood as well, where he gives the pharaohs very Arabic-sounding names like Al-Walid ibn Musab, who he claims was the pharaoh from the Exodus story. He calculates the reign of pre-Islamic Egypt from the first pharaoh to the Arab conquests to be around 1300 years. Remarkably, he's off by only around 2500 years.
Wow.
However, the scholar Abu Mashar al-Balkhi dates the flood to around 3200 BCE, which coincides with the founding of the first dynasty of Egypt. It doesn't say much, but I found it interesting. An interesting...
How long have humans been around for? There's so many wild takes on how long humans have been around for. Scientists say that humans have been around for 100,000 years. I think. Could be wrong. But the thing is, keep in mind, I'm looking at this from a Bible's perspective, Christian Bible perspective. The stories in the Bible, people were old. Like, I'm talking, people were like hundreds of years old before they finally died. So you got to keep that into perspective. Oh man, there's just so much stuff lost to time that we will never be able to understand, and it annoys me so much. Even the Bible does say that there's unfinished books that were lost to time, unfinished pages that are lost to time. And before you go in my comments talking about some but how could that, guys? So many documents, so many records, so many historical stuff have just it's common for it to be lost in time. I mean, come on. You know how many like tablets, like the Rosetta Stone, are probably lost to time? We were lucky to find the Rosetta Stone, bruh, and all those other few stuff. I bet you there was so much stuff there that's just lost to time, because that's basically what the Bible, the Quran, all that stuff is. It's basically just like written information that the future generation is supposed to read for them to understand what happened in the past. I'm sure that so many of those stuff have been written down for us, and it's lost to time, you know?
Side note here. While Cleopatra has been seen in the past by Western historians largely as a beautiful, charming woman whose only achievement was seducing two of Rome's greatest generals, a perception that has thankfully changed in recent times, medieval Muslim scholars certainly saw her as being a much more accomplished pharaoh. Al-Masudi says that she was a sage and a philosopher who wrote books on medicine and magic. The historian Ibn Abd al-Hakam calls her a great builder. Arab biographies of the Greek physician Galen mention that a woman named Cleopatra was one of his mentors. The alchemist Al-Jildaki even mentions her as a great alchemist. All of these accounts are certainly exaggerated and a different form of romanticization of her, but it does show how captivating she was even more than 1,000 years after her death. The pyramids were and are the most clear and imposing of the many monuments left behind by the ancient Egyptians. As a result of that, the pyramids left the medieval Muslims who visited them full of wonder. There are many accounts of the pyramids, from explanations of why they were built to their physical description. The Muslim polymath Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi even took measurements of them and tried to explain their connection to the stars. Interestingly, he tried to enter one but gave up around 2/3 of the way in because he was overcome by fear. Side note here, Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi
I can't blame him. That looks claustrophobic as hell.
is quickly becoming my favorite historical figure. He was, like I mentioned before, a polymath, and he seems to rival Leonardo da Vinci himself in his curiosity. As a physician, he praises the beauty of the humanoid statues. He looks at buildings and thinks about their practical purpose. He also seems impressed by how well preserved the mummies were. He examined them and determined that the 2nd century Greek physician Galen was wrong about the lower jaw. It seems that he even unwrapped a mummy because he seems to know quite a bit about how they were wrapped. Just a wonderful thinker overall. According to al-Baghdadi, one of the smaller pyramids was destroyed by Salahuddin Ayyubi, also known as Saladin. Its stones may have been used to build or reinforce the wall around the city of Cairo.
Why? Bro, why? Why would you? Who would, bruh? I know who Salahuddin is, but come on, bro. Come on. You couldn't get stone somewhere else. Why would you destroy something like that? Come on. That is such a great historical piece. Why would you destroy that?
However, Al-Idrisi says that both Salahuddin and his son Al-Aziz tried to demolish some pyramids but ultimately failed. Al-Idrisi sheds some light on the process of demolition. It seems that the stones were being removed from top to bottom, of course, but they were being damaged as they were moved to the ground. He doesn't mention if a crane of some sort was involved. From other sources, it seems that levers and wedges were used to push the stones down. In the end, the cost of demolishing the pyramids was too great, and so he refrained from doing it. Although al-Baghdadi's account is probably more accurate because he was not only a contemporary of Saladin, but had also met him. This destruction of ancient monuments was quite common apparently. People used construction material from ancient Egyptian buildings to build new stuff, literally building their futures from their past. Al-Idrisi mentions that he went to the temple of Karnak as a child with his father, where some people were removing blocks from it. His father lamented that these buildings should be left alone. A sentiment that many
yes.
can relate to.
Hell
Many
yes.
writers talk of the pyramids
Freaking
as
hell.
monuments to be preserved because of their history and their connection to prophets and caliphs. There doesn't seem to have been much objection to them as pagan structures of a bygone era and thus having no place in an Islamic empire, as there was to some ancient temples. On the contrary, it seems that they
What if the pyramids are just there to protect? I think the pyramids are there to protect something, hence why they're structured the way that they are, and they're so difficult to even get rid of, and hence why they lasted for so long. But the question is, what are they protecting? Like some type of knowledge, some type of pharaoh? Like, I don't know. That's just my theory. I'm not saying that's a fact. Okay, like. Or it could be a temple. Could be a temple of sorts, I think, maybe, who knows.
were a big tourist destination. People regularly visited them on the way to Arabia from northwestern Africa when they went on the pilgrimage. Similarly, the Fatimid caliphs of Egypt started the annual celebration of the Night of Fire by lighting a huge fire on top of the Great Pyramid. Another point of veneration for the pyramids comes from al-Masudi's version of al-Mamun's version of events regarding the destruction of the pyramids. He writes that on one of those pyramids, there was a writing that was apparently left by the ancient Egyptians that challenged any equal monarch to destroy the pyramids, taunting them by saying, "We built these so whoever maintains equality with us in sovereignty, attainment of power, and fulfillment of the charge of dominion, let him destroy these pyramids and efface their inscriptions. Although to destroy is easier than to construct, and taking apart is easier than to put together." He then mentions that one ruler tried to destroy a pyramid but couldn't raise enough money. While it is most likely a fictional story, it also shows how some people respected the pyramids and those who built them. The most famous episode in the medieval Islamic world regarding the pyramids happened during the reign of Al-Mamun around 832 CE or maybe 820 CE. Al-Mamun went to Egypt to quash a rebellion by the Copts. So he took a Christian clergyman named Dionysius of Telmare with him so he could help negotiate with the rebels. At some point during the campaign, Al-Mamun tried to break into the Great Pyramid at Giza. He might have worked on some previous tunnels that had been made by someone in the past. He also got a, quote, translator to help him understand the writing in and around the pyramids. This translator was named Ayub ibn Maslama. According to Al-Idrisi, there were 10 scripts on the pyramid, and Ibn Maslama could read only 4. Michael Cooperson thinks that it's possible that those 10 scripts were simply graffiti from the centuries of tourists, and maybe Ibn Maslama could read only a few like Greek or Coptic. Al-Idrisi does mention a piece of Arabic writing in the Kufic script on a pyramid in Giza that read something like the Islamic Declaration of Faith, the statement, "I declare Allah to be one." So clearly there was a lot of graffiti on the pyramids. Anyhow, there are different
interesting.
What happened? For example, Al-Maqrizi writes down multiple accounts in the same book that are contradictory. Some stories say that Al-Mamun failed to even enter the pyramid. Others say that he entered and there were spirits or traps that discouraged him from going further. Yet others say that he found a body or sarcophagus or nothing at all. In any case, the story is interesting because it shows that people who saw the pyramids were certainly curious about what was in them. Al-Mamun was already very interested in learning. He had funded a lot of scholars, he had jump-started the translation movement, etc. So
this is okay. There's a lot of info here to take in. I'm trying to make sense of, but let's hear what he says.
Sounds like something Al-Mamun would do. Only a century after him, we find the story of Hermes in Ibn al-Nadim's Fihrist, so maybe Al-Mamun also thought that there was ancient knowledge inside the pyramids. Like I mentioned before, medieval Muslims were huge admirers of the scientific works of the ancient Egyptians. Thanks to its connection with Idris, Egypt was seen by many scholars as being the land where what we would now call science was invented.
Okay.
It had been helped by the fact that many of the Greek scholarly works that the Muslims were translating and studying were written in Egypt. I find it interesting that Muslims thought that about ancient Egypt, because medieval Egypt was also the land where the scientific method may have first been used by Ibn al-Haytham. Anyhow, this reputation of Egypt...
That's a fair take. That's a fair take, to be honest. Yeah, I can't really argue with that. Yeah, that's a fair take.
The land of wisdom was one of the reasons that medieval Muslims were so interested in it. We find mentions of many things that were invented in Egypt. Some are real, some aren't. Muslims talk about Egyptian medicine, their water distribution systems, their tombs and decorations, their buildings and their connections with the stars, their automated clocks that chimed at every hour, their artificial breeding of chickens, etc. However, the only thing that's conspicuously missing is how the pyramids were built. There are many explanations for why they were built, but not how, at least none that I could find. It seems weird that these practical-minded Muslims who were using mechanical devices and building beautiful architecture were so silent on how the ancient Egyptians were able to lift those multi-ton stones up that far into the air. It's simply baffling. Maybe the medieval Muslims already had an idea of how the pyramids were built, whether accurate or not, and they didn't think it was worthy of discussion. We simply don't know. The ancient Egyptian language, or as it was known by the Arabs, Al-Qibt al-Awwal, or the first Coptic, used 4 scripts. The most famous of these are the hieroglyphs. The others are Hieratic, Demotic, and Coptic, with Coptic being the most recent and the only one alive at the time of the Arab conquest of Egypt. It's clear that medieval Muslims understood that there were these 4 distinct scripts. Some scholars even believed that Coptic holds the key to deciphering the language of the ancient Egyptians. The first medieval Muslim scholar that we know of who tried to decipher the Egyptian script is the aforementioned Jabir ibn Hayyan. Scholars after him considered him to be something of an expert on the topic of deciphering ancient Egyptian languages. For For example, Ibn Wahshiyya tells his readers to read Ibn Hayyan to learn more about the ancient scripts. He also called an ancient script.
But like, how do they decrypt this stuff? How this is something that I've always wondered for a long time. How do they do that? Even like now, today, they're like, oh, we're able to decrypt this language, this ancient language. I'm like, how in the world are you able to do that? Like, what tools and what? That just seems impossible to me. That's one of my biggest questions I've ever had for a long time. How are they able to even decrypt these languages that are supposed to be long gone and extinct? Like, how do they do it when it doesn't, it's not around anymore, it's extinct?
That he assumed was Egyptian, Qalam Jabir ibn Hayyan, the script of Jabir ibn Hayyan. Some of the letters here seem to be demotic. Unfortunately, nothing from Ibn Hayyan's work on deciphering these ancient scripts has come down to us. But the theme of a Sufi alchemist who tried to understand the ancient Egyptian scripts appears quite a few times. In fact, you can say that alchemists were the people most interested in unlocking the secrets of these scripts. Other than Ibn Hayyan, 4 other names appear as major figures trying to understand the scripts. The first is Ayub ibn Maslama, who helped Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun in deciphering the writings on the pyramids when he tried to break into one. Ibn Maslama apparently also had a book called Priestly Talismans, which contained translations of many inscriptions. Then we have a Sufi mystic known as Dhul-Nun al-Misri, who also had a book on deciphering ancient Egyptian scripts. According to al-Masudi, Dhul-Nun could read the hieroglyphs. However, due to the fact that the translations sound very Arabic and use Arabic tropes and aphorisms, modern scholars doubt that they're authentic. However,
Okay.
they managed to correctly decipher some letters of the Demotic script. Then we have Ibn Wahshiyya.
That's cool.
His work on ancient scripts contains more than 80 scripts. A lot of his work has survived, and he actually managed to decipher some things very accurately.
Oh wow,
There's a
that's impressive. This is, I don't know how they do it, but impressive.
Qasim al-Iraqi, who also managed to decipher at least 4 hieroglyphic letters correctly. The authenticity of these attempts to decipher the scripts doesn't really matter, because we know that arguably medieval Muslims simply didn't possess the tools to do what was done in the 19th century.
Right.
It does prove that medieval Muslims were very curious about them and wanted to know what they meant. In that sense, they should be labeled proto-Egyptologists, because there is a lot of work that has parallels to modern techniques. The success of their enterprise can be debated, but not the fact that they were very interested in ancient Egypt. Whether they could decipher them or not, Muslim scholars certainly admired the hieroglyphs a lot. We see them being used on manuscripts, seemingly for aesthetic purposes. Some symbols were quite obviously understood by Muslims. For example, this image shows various quotes of arms from the Mamluk era, and they use ancient Egyptian symbols that represent, among other things, the sun, Lord of Justice, and the Lord of the Two Lands.
Wait, so but if they don't understand anything from ancient Egypt, how are they able to use these symbols correctly? Unless I missed something in the video.
These fit quite well with how the Mamluks saw themselves, so clearly they made a deliberate choice here, knowing full well what these symbols meant. If it's a coincidence, then it's a hell of a coincidence. Ancient Egypt has been the land of treasures since, well, ancient Egypt. Even during the New Kingdom period, people knew and hunted treasures of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Under Islamic rule, that didn't quite change. Ahmad ibn Tulun himself was quite interested in finding treasures and using them for state purposes. For example, according to some sources, he found more than 4 tons of gold, which he used to fund infrastructure projects, including his famous mosque and a hospital. So it's no surprise that Ibn Tulun made searching for treasures illegal. Excavation of historic sites had to be done with a permit, and a state official had to be present at all times. During his time, an office known as Al-Mutlibin, or the Seekers, came into existence to oversee the state's monopoly over hunting treasures. Slowly, the office became quite powerful. During the Fatimid era, there was a leader of the Mutlibin who was so rich that when he died, it took 2 months to transfer his wealth from his treasury to the caliphs.
Bro, what in the world? Jeff Bezos of freaking... What is this? Jeff... Muslim Jeff Bezos. Muslim Jeff Bezos. Nah, I think that would be Mansa Musa though. He was a Muslim. He's the richest man thought to have ever existed, I think. That's still mad though.
Private citizens could go hunting for treasure, but a fifth of their find had to go to the caliph. People came from all over the Islamic world to try their luck. It's not for no reason that Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi calls the passion of finding treasures a plague. However, hunting treasures wasn't just a matter of going after and finding treasures. A lot of these treasures were considered to be cursed and protected by demons even. Al-Masudi tells a story from the reign of Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik. His brother, Abdulaziz ibn Marwan, was the governor of Egypt. By the way, for those who don't know, Abdulaziz was the father of the famous Umar ibn Abdulaziz. Umar ibn Abdulaziz, it's said, actually possessed some ancient artifacts and liked to display them for guests. It's quite interesting that such a famously pious man would have artifacts from the pagan ancient Egyptians. Anyhow, Abdulaziz is said to have sent an expedition to explore and find treasures in a tomb. When they got inside, two swords popped out of the ground and cut them in half. According to the story,
What? What? What in the... Oh my
were
goodness.
sent to find the treasure, but none returned. A similar story comes from the reign of the Ayyubid Sultan.
Wait, is that actually true? 1,000 and none return... Nah.
When a group of treasure hunters lost a group member to a curse. There were stories about the spirits of women, old men.
Bro, what type of Indiana Jones? Oh my goodness, man. It's like in those Indiana, like, you know, those movies where there's like this sacred treasure and, oh, there's like a whole bunch of booby traps and whatnot. Oh my gosh, dude, that is so cliche.
Boys, etc., who protected ancient sites from ill intentioned.
Oh my
As is
goodness.
usually the case, since there was a demand for tools to fight these curses and demons, there were tools available to do just that. As early as the 10th century, Ibn al-Nadim mentions manuals containing spells that were used to neutralize such supernatural threats. These were complex spells that needed quite a few items. I imagine treasure hunters were kind of like witchers back in the day. We find spells with names like for opening the treasure and for lowering the water, because apparently ancient Egyptians used magic to use water to protect treasures. These manuals didn't only contain tools for fighting demons and curses, but also included locations of treasures. One location I found of interest was one Maghirat al-Qitat, or the Cave of Cats, where thousands of cats were buried by ancient Egyptians. Some manuals included keys for translating hieroglyphs as well, but they're all fakes. Interestingly, some religious scholars were against treasure hunting. Egypt had been conquered by Muslims back in the 640s, largely peacefully, and as a result, the Egyptians got to keep their properties to a large extent, and according to said scholars, that included treasures. But none of this constitutes universally agreed upon facts. However, this didn't stop people from doing it. In short, it had all the trappings of any kind of gold rush, where you had people producing fake manuals to make some money, selling stuff to help with spells. You also had people scamming others by enticing them into going on treasure hunts, etc. While the ancient Egyptian gods were no longer worshipped by a majority of the people in Egypt, there was still a lot of their religion left behind, at least in the form of superstitions. Many travelers mention stories of locals, sometimes Muslims, sometimes Christians, performing rituals at ancient temples for various purposes, from getting rid of diseases to having babies. Many ancient icons were considered to be talismans that people used for various things. This is not unlike how, even today in the Islamic world, people visit Sufis and their shrines for certain things. In fact, Okasha al-Dale goes as far as to say that Islamic Sufism is firmly rooted in the Egyptian religion. Interestingly, some artifacts had more universal uses. For instance, the Sphinx at Giza was said to have protected Egypt from the encroaching desert. People made offerings there. According to Al-Idrisi, there was a day of the year when people offered incense to the Sphinx, hoping to get a good government job. With the current state of
I wonder. Yeah, I do believe that the Sphinx is probably there as some type of protector, because Sphinx are usually described as like a guardian type of mythical creature. So that I feel like if we understand what the Sphinx is there for, we will better understand the pyramids.
Capitalism, I wouldn't be shocked if this trend makes a comeback. All this was seen as very un-Islamic by tourists and travelers. According to Al-Maqrizi, a Muslim cleric named Muhammad Saim al-Dahr got so angry at this that he disfigured the Sphinx around 1378 or so by climbing it and destroying its nose. And that, kids, is how the Sphinx lost its nose. Popular belief is that it was actually destroyed by Napoleon with a cannon, but that's other sources mention Napoleon as respecting the history of the land that he had just conquered. Anyhow, that's beyond the scope of this.
Briefly conquered.
Okay, let's now get to the real nasty and weird part. So there's a naturally existing mineral called mamia. It's a type of resinous bitumen. I'm not going to explain what it is, just Google it and know that it was used in medicine in the medieval era. Actually, mamia was not even one thing. Various things have been given that label throughout the centuries. As you might expect, that led to a bit of confusion. So it's commonly said that Europeans translated Islamic sources about medicine and made a mistake. The source said that mamia is used for mummification and is also beneficial for health, but the translator thought that they meant the mummy is good for health.
Oh,
I'm not sure about that link because different books I read
I can see where this is going.
About it. So the whole
I can see where this is going.
In any case, mummies began to be seen as having medicinal properties. It could have just been a vestige of ancient Egyptian traditions. We do have a lot of historical sources about how the bodies of the dead were venerated. Like, for example, the bodies of saints in Coptic Egypt were considered to have magical powers. Islamic scholars did talk extensively about the medical uses of mineral mamia. Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, and Al-Biruni all talk about the various benefits of using it. However, by the 12th century, there are mentions of using the, quote, oils of dead people to give to the sick patients with fracture. Abdul Latif al-Baghdadi mentions that the mineral mamia and the mummy mamia aren't all that different, and people use the mummy one when the mineral one isn't available. So by the 12th century, people were using mummies to cure all kinds of medical problems. There are even manuals about what parts of the body are good for what ailment.
That's gross. That is so gross.
All this really made mummies into quite a commodity and hence created quite a market for them. People began finding mummies and selling them at high prices. European merchants were a big chunk of the customers. So much so that people began wrapping recently deceased people to make them look like mummies.
That's really nasty. That is so that's disgusting.
That this was such a huge problem that when a man was caught selling a counterfeit mummy to a European man, he was sentenced to death. This market for mummies stayed till the 19th century when this man was selling mummies in 1875. Leave a comment about whether you'd be willing to drink a mummy smoothie. It was also apparently used as an aphrodisiac because, nothing gets you in the mood like the ancient ground up remains of a random Egyptian dude. In the end, it's clear that medieval Muslims were very interested in ancient Egypt. Their interests extended from studying their pharaohs to their sciences and their religion. While early Muslim Arabs didn't see themselves as being connected to the pharaohs, they did see the Copts as being their descendants to some extent and having some of their traditions. Some vestiges of ancient Egypt were still alive when the Muslims conquered their land, and they died out slowly over the next few centuries as locals converted to Islam. It's difficult to say how these medieval non-Arab Muslims saw their connection to their ancient ancestors. We do find favorable mentions of Egyptian pharaohs and certainly an undertone of veneration or at least respect. It was only in the 19th and 20th centuries that the Egyptians started to connect themselves again with their ancient ancestors. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons behind this medieval disconnect was the fact that they couldn't understand the ancient language. This is in stark contrast to, for example, the Persians. Medieval Persians could largely understand their ancestors' language, and so they kept a lot of that ancient history alive. They retold their stories and made an effort to understand and revive their culture. Much of that ancient history was retrofitted with Islamic themes. The Egyptians...
I heard somewhere that Egyptians today are not descendants of ancient Egyptians, and that may be why. That may, because Persians are descendants of ancient Persians. That's probably why they can't understand, because Egyptians, so they might not be the actual. Because think about it, how in the world, if you're like the descendants of that, you should be able to still somewhat be able to like trace back the language, you know, like
never had that vital connection, and so they probably felt a disconnect between themselves and their ancestors. Another reason could be that the ancient Egyptian religion was quite clearly very different from Islam, whereas the Zoroastrian faith of the Persians could be said to be not that different from Islam. Whatever the case or the reason, one thing that we know for sure is that medieval Muslims, Egyptian or otherwise, wanted to unlock the secrets of the pharaohs. This not only shows the marvelous nature of ancient Egypt, but also the insatiable thirst for knowledge among medieval Muslim scholars. While these medieval Muslims could not be said to be practicing Egyptology, they were using a lot of tools quite similar to modern Egyptologists. So maybe they should get some credit for studying proto-Egyptology. Thank you for watching this video. It's longer and different than most of my other videos.
And thank you for watching my reaction to this video. If you came all the way to the end, you're new to my channel, go and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for me, go and comment down below. Make sure to like the video and check out my other Islam reactions. Okay, I gotta do a whole bunch because I've been so behind on that, man. All my suggestions with Islam, man. Anyways, man, I gotta go quickly get this video uploaded because my entire schedule has been backed up due to moving out. So I will see you, or you will see me tomorrow.